It was important, all the years to me is important, because all life is precious, and I missed out all that, messed up the time with my mother, with my father, the kids, and everything I had, I lost, all my possessions stuff, I lost all of that,
On January 30th, 2002, Robert Roberson's 2-year-old chronically ill daughter, Nikki, was sick with a high fever and suffered a short fall from bed. Robert woke the next morning to find her unconscious and unable to be revived. Despite his best efforts to get her medical help, she later died. Mr. Roberson was prosecuted, convicted, and sentenced to death under the now discredited shaken baby syndrome hypothesis.
The idea of shaken baby syndrome began in the early 1970s when a pediatric neurosurgeon named Norman Guthkelch wondered why some children he was seeing in his practice had internal bleeding with no or minimal external injury. And so the idea began to evolve that when a child had these medical findings, that they had been shaken. But there's really no scientifically reliable information that would support that idea. But what we can say is that there have been falls from short distances that have resulted in these kinds of findings. There have been medical conditions that result in these kinds of findings, things like sepsis, things like aneurysm, things like stroke. And there have been no reliably witnessed or videotaped shaking events that have resulted in these findings. Later, of course, Dr. Guthkelch came to believe that he had been mistaken in his early work on this hypothesis and that it had been applied incorrectly and unjustly in courts.
Robert's daughter Nikki was chronically ill from birth. Born to a single mother who was homeless and addicted to drugs, Nikki was taken away by CPS at birth, long before Robert was identified as the father. Doctors prescribed multiple types of antibiotics which did not resolve her infections. She also had unexplained breathing apnea that would cause her to cease breathing, collapse, and turn blue. The week before her death, Nikki had continuous diarrhea, coughing, and congestion. Her fever was measured at 104.5 degrees in the doctor's office when Robert took her in on January 29, 2002. But Nikki was sent home with the prescriptions that the FDA now warns against prescribing to a child Nikki's age and in her condition. The next night, Nikki's maternal grandparents, who were supposed to be keeping Nikki, called Robert and told him to drive out to their home in the country to pick her up, even though Nikki was still very sick. Of course, Robert complied. In the middle of the night, Robert was startled by a strange cry and found Nikki lying on the floor, having fallen out of bed. He couldn't see anything wrong with her, but later that morning, he woke to find that she was not breathing and her lips had turned blue. He rushed her to the hospital. Nikki's later autopsy, reassessed in light of current scientific understanding, shows that she had severe undiagnosed pneumonia that had progressed to sepsis. She was given dangerous medications no longer given to children her age and in her condition. Therefore, her death is entirely explained by natural and accidental causes.
If we had to take this same case to court today, knowing what there's no way in the world we get a conviction with a set of facts that we worked with. Wouldn't have happened. And I guess that's my challenge to the district attorney now is, if this same case came to you today, what could you possibly have done with it? Your shaken baby notion is gone. And so you have to go back again to those medical records which don't support anything but a natural death or an accidental death.
Robert had no history of being violent, but he did have a rough life growing up in rural Palestine, Texas.
I would pass Robert in the hall periodically, and I could see bruises on his face, and he was disheveled, and he would be bruised on his face or his arms.
Robert also has disabilities, including autism spectrum disorder, which was not diagnosed until 2018.
He was simple and he was different, and there was no doubt about it. He had almost a Forrest Gump quality about him.
When I first met Robert in the hospital, he struck me as odd. He was not responding typically to the circumstances that he was in. For investigators in that moment, it felt like something was being hidden. My impression of Robert now has changed measurably, I would say. Those things which I counted against him as being an unemotional, potentially guilty individual, I now have a name for it. It's autism.
My relationship with Robert goes into a spiritual advisor, but he calls me Mama Donna, especially since his mother died. Sometimes I feel guilty about saying I'm his spiritual advisor because more often than not, I think he's mine.
What keeps me hopeful? My faith in the Lord and stuff, because one day walking up out of here,
Robert Roberson was one of the first 28 guys that were selected to participate in the faith-based program. They were vetted for 3 years. Their disciplinary record was looked at for the past 3 years. If they had any type of disciplinary cases, they weren't going to be allowed to participate in the faith-based program. So there's so many different programs that these men took, and he graduated from 10 of them during the course of 18 months.
I want people to know that I'll be there for them, and I'll do all I can do to be the best me.
I know a lot of men on death row, but there's very few of them that I believe are innocent. I believe they all have stories, and they all have mitigating circumstances involved in their crime, but there's very few men back there that I really believe is innocent. And I spent 28 and a half years in prison, so I know what an innocent guy in prison looks like. My opinion is that Robert is innocent, and I think that the state of Texas is making a mistake.
I hope that because they cannot use the evidence that basically was used against him, that he will walk a free man, that he'll be able to put his arms around his kids again, that he'll be able to put his arms around his wife, that he'll be able to put his arms around me, and that he can use what has happened to him to make other people's lives better, which is what he wants to do.
Robert should not be where he is. The system failed and continues to fail. Somebody has to intervene here, or an innocent man is going to be killed by the state of Texas. There is no doubt in my mind that he is an innocent man, and we are working hard. For some reason, the state of Texas is working hard to kill him.